Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Logan Mohtashami to talk about the impacts of the recent hurricanes on housing in the areas that were impacted. We also talk about housing inventory and where we are right now. And he even gives us a sneak peek into home price forecasts for 2025. So, Logan, welcome back to the podcast. This is Tracey Velt. I'm filling in for Sarah Wheeler, and I feel honored to talk to the chart daddy.
Yes, and Sarah lost again in her fantasy football league, so she left the country out of shame. So then she's out for a week.
Yes, I can't talk fantasy football with you, though, because I'm not doing it. So I heard your last podcast. And so let's just say I'm winning because I'm not doing it. So
there you go.
Oh, well, I am sitting here in Orlando, Florida, getting ready for Hurricane Milton to come right through the center of the state after it hits Tampa Bay. We've got a little bit of time before we actually know the true path of the hurricane. So I have to admit, I've lived in Florida for over 30 years and have been through Category 3 hurricanes before. But this one feels different. It feels like it's definitely a scarier hurricane. So I want to talk to you about housing. Obviously we just had Hurricane Helene hit, Carolinas and, those areas and also parts of Florida. And now we've got Milton hitting Florida and some other areas. So talk to me.
This is an interesting topic because earlier in the year, I was asked about, climate change and its impact to housing. And one of the things I've brought up and talked about this to some degree last year, that certain parts of the U.S. now might not be livable for certain home buyers. And where in the past, we would see a hurricane kind of have a lot of damage and there will be a lot of rebuilds and, construction workers will get employment and there has to be a lot of things done for the economy to grow. This is different because what's occurring now, and it's not just Florida, there's other parts of the US as well, but Florida gets a lot of the attention. If insurance costs are too much, and you don't get insurance, you're basically wishing that FEMA comes in and bails everything out. But over time, is that stress? Having that in the back of your mind all the time, that I don't have any insurance, and what if FEMA doesn't cover this? Is it worth it for certain home buyers to live in? Because when I always talk about Florida economics, I always say I think people just go straight into the insurance issue first. But really, we have to talk about it in general, macro terms. Florida is like everywhere else. Home prices escalated out of control. Rates are higher than what people are traditionally. So you have that housing inflation component excluding the insurance right off the bat. But now you have the cost of insurance going up aggressively, and you don't know when's it going to stop, right? That's another concern is that, is my insurance going to keep on going up and up and up? Then you have the condo project approvals and certain condos can't get mortgages and certain people can't sell. So there are issues in some of the markets in Florida now that you have to think about going out for the next 5, 10, 15 years. Do you as a home buyer feel that it's okay to put you and your family in that risk pool if you can't afford insurance? If people have insurance, then they're going to get covered. And, if they can handle the insurance payment, that's not the deal here. But I think going out in the future, we have to figure out how do we resolve this to where a state doesn't have this stigma that, hey, listen, if you come here, you're rolling the dice, that FEMA is going to come and bail you out when you have a hurricane here. So I think that's where it's different because it's not like Florida is super cheap, right? There's a lot of parts of the US where you have climate risk, but it's cheaper to go there. So people kind of go there just for the cost of shelter is cheaper. But, after how home prices escalate out of control and rates, it becomes a different kind of story now. And that's why I think looking at the Florida market and seeing what homeowners do in the future gives you kind of a pathway of what can be the case if things get worse, where you can't get insurance or the cost of insurance is too much. And how do home buyers react? And is the Midwest now the migration, area, because there is less risk in that and it is cheaper there?
Yeah, it's funny. I saw somebody posted, hey, if you're looking for somewhere that doesn't have a lot of, all of these climate disasters, go to the upper Midwest. Might have freezing cold and blizzards, but you're not going to get the wildfires. You're not going to get the tornadoes. You're not going to get the hurricanes. The risk is much lower. And I know my insurance, we're inland. We're in Orlando, so we're inland. Really, by the time the hurricanes generally get here, they're tropical storms or maybe category 1. I think Charlie might have been a 3 when it came through. And we have a new roof, so it's a couple years old, and our insurance more than doubled in the past year, just 1 year, for our house. And again, we're not in a flood zone. We are not on the coast. We are not, in a typically dangerous area for natural disasters. So it's definitely an issue here in Florida, the cost of insurance. If they want to move to Orlando, you're in a little bit of a safer area, I guess.
It's, of course, the coastal areas, especially on the west side of Florida. That's where a lot of the damage can happen. But also, I know here in California, my second home is in a fire zone, and it's a rental, and my tenant has had to get evacuated 8 times in the last 6 years. So it hasn't gotten there yet, but I feel like I'm rolling the dice, and I wouldn't buy in that area now, because I feel that with the I don't know how much is going to get covered. I'm just not sure about everything. Is it worth it? So even for myself here in California, which obviously hurricanes is our problem, but with fires, right? Yeah. It would change my view on purchasing a home, and I think this is all going to be new for everyone, because we're going to see a country make decisions, on things that they really haven't needed to worry about as much. Because if you had insurance and it was affordable, then everyone is secured and set. And if you're assuming that FEMA comes in and bails everyone out, that's another thing. But I think now people are going, do I really want to, if this starts to pick up more and more? And I think that implies that the cost of shelter in these areas are just going to be naturally higher, and that the Midwest, is going to be maybe the beneficiary of something like this. And just work from home was, to me, the craziest variable in housing economics ever. I mean, we all have to live somewhere between 5 to 90 minutes away from our work to drive there. But now, if you could do your stuff at home, hello, you could go to a lot of places, and that caused so much chaos. Here in Orange County, a lot of wealthy people in Orange County went to Boise, Idaho, and it's really cheap in Boise, Idaho, for Orange County people. So, the migration patterns will be interesting if this does occur, and we start to see more migration out of places like Florida or California, places where insurance is an issue. And what does that do to the housing ecosystem in areas that are cheaper, that have not been hit so much with the insurance costs? And is that going to be something we model out in the future, that Minnesota, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, those areas are going to be the new Sun Belts? And it's just another variable in a more chaotic time. I mean, I always think about the last decade, and the last decade was so boring. housing economics wasn't that very exciting. Home sales were steady, prices never escalate out of control. Nothing really happened. It was a very slow, steady housing cycle. But now everything is being thrown into this after COVID, and it feels like we haven't had a normal year. Something pops up that just doesn't, it isn't something we're accustomed to, and then we have to see the aftermath of that. So I'm hoping that eventually, there's good. We can get things done as a country, right? We put our heads together, we can make magic happen. So I'm hoping that in the future something happens where this gets resolved in a way where people feel a little bit more secure, because it doesn't seem like things are going to ease up on the climate side, and you could see these insurance companies are just leaving. Right? You can't do business in these kind of areas. So that's not a good long-term perspective of a housing. So hopefully heads come together and something kind of a reasonable response to something like this. And hopefully we don't have to wait for another hurricane to have this topic again, and we just get to work on finding solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And from what I understand, if you're waiting on FEMA to bail you out, it's not happening anytime soon. So we'll we'll see about
Yeah, I mean,
that.
I think that's the other issue. If even if you're relying on government assistance, yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
going through that whole process, the time and
Mm.
everything, it's just, and if it keeps on happening over and over again, I think that's where you start to get strained. That's why I'm hoping that there is time and money and people invested in the future to find a more efficient way to do this, because the trend is going one way here, and it's not a positive trend. And there has to be some kind of security for homeowners, because if you're not covered with insurance or flood insurance or something like this, it makes it not an tenable situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know in the Altos data, we have already seen Asheville, listings drop off a cliff, which is to be expected since you can't even really get into the city. So, what are the long term impacts? What do you think, or in your experience has happened in some of these markets that are hit? Obviously, closings aren't happening. Um, you know, Properties that were listed might be damaged and can't stay on the market. People aren't putting new properties on the market because there's so much damage. What's the cycle in a disaster such as this?
Really, not much goes on early on because you're assessing the damage. And also, I think the other variable here is one of the things that we've always seen in economics is that whenever there's a major hurricane, jobless claims tick up in areas. So you're going to get an initial, okay, well, you're not working, your house is destroyed, and then how big the damage is really impacts. If it's a very small portion of a certain area and majority of the houses are there and everything, things can get back up quicker. So really, the level of damage into an area, wherever the damage area is, that core does not get back to normal anytime soon. So that's the
Hold
reality
on.
of what happens after hurricanes. But then there is the rebuilding of that. But the question now is the rebuilding. Does the
Yeah.
family want to live there? That's now a big question mark. Does somebody go, well, I'm if I get insurance, it's going to go up even more now. And do I just say, hey, listen, this is it for me? I think that's something we have to think about after the aftermath. Are some people just saying, "Hey, listen, it's just not going to work for me," and I think that's where the not having insurance and having insurance companies leave. There's where the downside is. It's because in the past you get it, you have insurance, you rebuild everything. I'm sure some people probably will, hey, thank God I'm rebuilding my 40, 50-year-old home. But in this context, you're just not sure. You're not sure if you could get insurance. You're not sure how much it's going to cost you, and it's not like it's cheap anymore. So I'm waiting to see that response, because that's the human. That's something in economics you can't really model out until you see the behavior change. And that's the one thing I'm going to be focusing on in certain markets. Do some people just go, hey, this is not going to work for me? And how many more insurance companies leave these areas? And this can't continue at the current trend, right? This is not a workable situation. So people are going to have to get together and find a way here to make it work, because the human element kind of wins at the end. And if people just say, "Hey, listen, I could move to Minnesota and I'll just take my shovel and take that snow out of the garage lane, and that's fine with me," then to deal with this.
Yeah, well, I used to live in Buffalo as well, and I do not recommend the blizzards and the snowfall that that area gets. So
Well, I'm blessed in living in Irvine, California. So if it gets like 69 degrees here, that it's freezing. And if we
yeah,
just get a little bit of misting rains, nobody can drive at all here. So we are fortunate. But of
yeah.
course, Southern California is super expensive, and it's not like I don't think we're going to get migration here anytime soon from Florida or Minnesota. But again, that's it's a new variable. It's something, it's an unfortunate reality that we're dealing with. And on the economic side, it's one thing when you can model out mortgage rates and inventory and prices and everything. Those are numbers. Those are things that we can
Mhm.
see. But here, it's just one of these things you just don't know. And you just have to see what happens in the aftermath.
So I want to talk a little bit about inventory as well. So I guess the question is it balanced yet? So let's get into that a little bit.
I love Housing 2024 because I am finally getting the inventory growth that I wanted to see in the last few years. It's happening this year. And our Altos data is a little bit different than the NAR, but I've always had a rule of thumb since COVID happened. I will only be happy with the national housing market when we have over 4 months supply, and the total active listings using the NAR data is about 1.52 to 1.93 million. That's basically the 2019, and that was enough active inventory to have a functioning marketplace. We weren't able to do it in the last few years, but we're getting close. We already have 4 months of supply. That's to me is a plus, and we're about 170,000 away from getting to that low end level. And that was really the kind of the 5-decade low in inventory before 2020. But the days on market are up. And to me, that's why I would say over 4 months is balanced. You get to that level, we're almost there. I always look at inventory different than other people. I just look at the active listings. I don't really care about how many people say X amount of homes need to be built. I just look at that active listings. And I was not a fan of the housing market because the days on market, I always say this: whenever the days on market are a teenager or under, nothing good happens in housing. That is not a good thing. You either have a massive credit sales boom, which is not going to be sustainable, or you have too many people chasing too few homes. We had this one, the second one. We had too many people chasing too few homes, and it just was going to be hard to get to there, to get anywhere back to normal. And if we talk about the NAR's data, normal is 2 to 2.5 million. That's kind of the normal range for decades. So we're nowhere close to getting anywhere near normal. I mean, it would almost have to be double the inventory just to get back to the higher end range of how normal channels were. But I feel so much better about 2024. And some of our Altos weekly data, we're actually seeing inventory still grow healthy based on my models, with rates being lower. And I was just like, you couldn't ask for anything more if you wanted a balanced housing market, because it's better for everyone when there's more choices and things don't move as fast, right? Because then sellers don't have to feel stressed of selling their homes, finding another property, and it becomes a more functioning housing market, which was not the case in 2020, 2021, 2022, or 2023. But 2024 somewhat reminds me of what a normal housing market looks like.
Well, and I know we're working on a forecasting research report, and I know you're helping with that. So, is there any like little spoilers you can offer the audience on the outlook for 2025?
You know, I always take my own 20 forecasts really seriously. I always do them at the end of the year because, you just don't know. Like, I feel bad for so many people. A lot of people's forecasts, and then like we had so much action happen mid part of November to December, and it changed everyone. So I always wait to the very last day to do mine. But this forecast, which is going to have an unbelievable amount of information in it, my little tidbit is this. I was probably on the lower end side of my price forecast out of anybody out there, and that isn't going to change much at all going into 2025. And I always tell people, if you look at the history of home prices going back to 1942, nominal home price declines are rare, but whenever you have a very, very explosive period in time, whether it's the early to mid 1940s or the late 70s, or even now, you don't usually have prices accelerate in kind of a year or two when things stable out because inventory starts to pick up, the supply and demand equilibrium is better. So that's kind of like a little hint on 2025. And then when the final forecast comes out, we always break down every single thing and where we're going to go and who knows what's going to happen by the end of December. But this one is going to have so much information of going into 2025, then everybody could kind of see where everyone's at. But I'm kind of going to keep my same approach with price growth in 2025 as I did in 2024 because the affordability. So this is where I disagree with people. People say, well, if rates go down, prices are going to take off like crazy. No. Back then in 2021 and 2020, inventory is at all-time lows. We had 3% mortgage rates. Affordability was better than before the crisis. You don't have that same affordability mix here. You can get better affordability. You can grow sales with lower rates, but you don't have that, 10, 15, 20 home price capacity anymore because active inventory did grow. So I'm just staying in line with kind of how I look at housing economics. Nothing's really changing for me, but it gives people an idea of the mindset. And everybody has a different mindset of where they think things are going to go. But I always encourage people, look at the history of home prices going back to 1942 to 2024. You take 2007 and 11 out of the equation. That was a once-in-a-lifetime event. We only had one negative price year. It's only 1%. It was highly, Southern California related. And you just work off of that supply and demand and realize affordability is still shot. We had a period like this back in the early 1980s. And in the early 1980s, we had more inventory, less workers, a recession. Affordability was worse. Home prices didn't fall, but they didn't really grow fast early on, even with lower mortgage rates until things start to work themselves out. And remember, every year that goes on, wages grow, household formation grows, dual incomes grow. You get all these things that tends over time make things more affordable by wages growing. And then you add lower rates into the equation, cool down on prices. That's so much of the housing cycles post World War II. But we always talk about what's happening last week or what could happen in the future. We don't go back in history and look at different times to where we try to correlate this type of cycle.
Well, Logan, it has been a pleasure, and I am very honored to host HousingWire Daily
yes,
with you.
I love having you here because you let me talk and don't tell me I'm doing something wrong and try to, so I love it, So we should do this more often.
Absolutely.